The autumn sun hung low over the Sweetwater County Fairgrounds, casting long shadows across the dusty auction yard. Caspian Hendricks stood at the back of the crowd, his calloused hands wrapped around a lukewarm coffee cup, watching the procession of horses being led through the ring. Most were young, well-groomed animals, with clean papers and clear eyes. Then came Lot 47. The stallion fought every step. His coat, once glossy black, now dulled with neglect, bore scars that told stories no one wanted to hear. A long, ragged mark ran down his left flank, and his right ear had a notch missing. But it was his eyes that stopped Caspian cold. They weren't wild or crazed. They were watchful, calculating, almost disappointed. Lot 47, the auctioneer's voice crackled through the speakers. 8-year-old stallion, no papers, seized from a property foreclosure up in Carbon County. Now, I'll be honest with y'all, this one's a handful. Got a history of refusing handlers. Whispers rippled through the crowd. A woman in the front row shook her head. Too dangerous, she muttered to her husband. Not worth the liability. Who'll start the bidding at $500? The auctioneer called out. Silence. 400? More silence. 200? People turned away, suddenly fascinated by their phones or the dirt beneath their boots. The auctioneer's frustration was palpable. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got to move this animal. $100, 50, 20. His voice grew desperate. Fine, $1. Someone give me $1 and take this horse off our hands. Caspian's hand went up before his brain could catch up. $1, he said, his voice carrying across the quiet crowd. The auctioneer's gavel came down like a gunshot. Sold to the gentleman in the back for $1. As Caspian signed the paperwork in the dusty office trailer, the yard manager, a weathered man named Earl, gave him a skeptical look. You sure about this, son? That horse has put 3 handlers in the hospital. Insurance won't even cover him anymore. I'm sure, Caspian replied, though he wasn't certain why. He owned a small ranch 40 miles north, left to him by his grandfather. It was mostly empty now, just him, a handful of cattle, and too much silence. Loading the stallion into the trailer was a 2-hour ordeal. The horse reared, kicked, and screamed protests that echoed across the fairgrounds. But eventually, exhausted and cornered, he relented. As Caspian secured the trailer door, those dark eyes fixed on him again, not with hatred, but with a question. Why? The drive home took Caspian through winding mountain roads as the sun set behind the Rockies, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. In the rearview mirror, he could see the stallion's silhouette, motionless except for the occasional shudder. When they arrived at the ranch, just after nightfall, Caspian led the horse, whom he'd decided to call Shadow for obvious reasons, to a large paddock with a 3-sided shelter. He'd prepared fresh hay, clean water, and left the gate wide open to the pasture beyond. Shadow bolted the moment the trailer opened, galloping to the farthest corner of the paddock where he stood, sides heaving, staring at Caspian across the distance. It's okay, boy, Caspian said softly, knowing the horse couldn't hear him from that far away. Take all the time you need. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Caspian's life. Shadow refused to be approached. He'd eat the hay only after Caspian left, and would bolt if anyone came within 30 feet. The water trough had to be filled by hose from outside the fence, because Shadow would charge at any human who entered the paddock. Caspian's neighbor, Maris Sullivan, a retired veterinarian who lived on the adjacent property, stopped by one morning with fresh coffee and concern etched on her weathered face. Caspian, honey, I've seen you out here at dawn and past midnight, she said, leaning against the paddock fence. That horse is traumatized. Might be he's too far gone. He's not, Caspian insisted, watching Shadow pace the far fence line. Look at how he moves. That's not wild, that's trained. Someone taught him things, then threw him away like garbage. Maris studied the stallion with professional eyes. You might be right. The way he holds his head, his gait, that's not a range horse. But whatever happened to him, it broke something fundamental. That night, a cold front moved through, bringing the first real chill of October. Caspian checked on Shadow at sunset, noting how the horse had moved into the shelter but refused to go near the hay. He was losing weight, his ribs beginning to show beneath that scarred coat. "Please eat," Caspian whispered, standing at the fence. "I'm not going to hurt you." Shadow's ears flicked forward just for a moment before he turned away. Days bled into each other. Caspian tried everything, sitting in the paddock for hours, reading aloud, playing soft music from his phone. Shadow watched from a distance, always calculating, never approaching. The rejection stung more than Caspian expected. He'd been rejected before, by his ex-wife, who'd left him for a life in Denver 2 years ago, by his corporate job that had laid him off, by the conventional path everyone expected him to follow. Maybe that's why he'd felt such a pull toward this rejected horse. On the 24th day, something shifted. Caspian was sitting on an overturned bucket near the gate, sketching the landscape in an old notebook, something his grandfather had taught him, when he felt eyes on him. He looked up slowly. Shadow had moved to within 15 feet, watching him draw. "Hey, boy," Caspian said softly, not moving. "You like art?" The stallion's ears pricked forward. For 5 precious minutes, they existed in the same space without fear. Then a truck backfired on the distant highway, and Shadow bolted back to his corner. But it was progress, the first real progress in weeks. The emergency weather alert came through Caspian's phone at 6:47 p.m. Severe thunderstorm warning, possibility of tornadic activity, take shelter immediately. He'd lived in Wyoming long enough to know these warnings weren't issued lightly. He'd spent the afternoon reinforcing the barn and moving his cattle to the lower pasture, but Shadow remained in his paddock, pacing restlessly as the sky turned an ominous green-black. The wind picked up, bending the cottonwood trees nearly horizontal. "Come on, boy," Caspian called, opening the paddock gate and the barn door. "You need to get inside." Shadow reared, eyes rolling white. He hated the barn, wouldn't go near it. The first drops of rain hit like bullets. Within seconds, it became a deluge. Caspian had no choice. He had to take shelter. He ran for the barn, pulling the heavy door closed behind him just as the tornado sirens began their awful wail. Through the barn's small window, Caspian watched the storm's fury. Lightning fractured the sky, and the wind roared like a living thing. Then he saw Shadow. The stallion wasn't running in panic. He was standing rigid, facing south, his whole body tense. Suddenly, Shadow broke into a gallop, not away from the storm, but toward Caspian's house. Confused, Caspian squinted through the rain-lashed window. Then he saw it. Maris's truck parked in his driveway. She must have come to check on him before the storm hit. Her truck was there, but where was she? Shadow reached the house and began pacing by the porch, then moved to the old root cellar entrance, a separate structure built into the hillside 20 yards from the main house. He poured at the door, whinnying urgently. Caspian's blood ran cold. The cellar. Maris must have gone there for shelter, but the door, he remembered now. The door stuck from the inside. You could get in, but without someone on the outside to lift the latch, you couldn't get out. Without thinking, Caspian burst from the barn into the storm. Rain blinded him instantly, and the wind nearly knocked him off his feet. Shadow saw him and ran toward him, then back toward the cellar, clearly communicating, "Follow me, hurry!" Together, they reached the cellar. Caspian could hear Maris pounding on the inside, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Caspian! I'm trapped! The door won't— I've got you!" he shouted, wrestling with the rusted external latch. His fingers were numb from cold and rain, but finally the mechanism gave way. The door flew open, and Maris stumbled out, gasping. "The radio said rotation spotted," she started, but Shadow interrupted with a sharp whinny, dancing backward. His attention was fixed on the southern horizon. Then Caspian saw it, a dark funnel dropping from the clouds, still distant but moving their direction. "Barn, now!" Caspian grabbed Maris's arm. To his shock, Shadow followed them, crowding close as they ran. They made it inside seconds before the tornado touched down a quarter-mile south. The barn shook, boards groaning, but held firm. The three of them, two humans and one dangerous stallion, huddled together in the center aisle as the storm raged. Shadow stood between them and the door, as if standing guard. When debris hit the exterior with sharp cracks, he didn't bolt. He didn't panic. He remained steady, alert, protective. The storm passed in 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. When silence finally fell, Caspian looked at Shadow, really looked at him. The horse's breathing was controlled, despite the terror they'd just survived. His stance was measured, professional even. "That wasn't luck," Maris whispered, staring at the stallion. "That was training, specialized training." Maris returned the next morning with Dr. Alaric Stone, an equine veterinarian from Cheyenne who specialized in behavioral assessment. Alaric was in his 60s, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Shadow allowed them into the paddock, not close but no longer charging. The storm had changed something in him, as if saving Maris had reminded him of who he used to be. Alaric spent 2 hours observing from a distance, taking notes, occasionally asking Caspian questions. Finally, he approached the fence where Caspian stood. "Mr. Hendricks, this is not a wild horse," Alaric said firmly. "This is a highly trained animal. Watch his response patterns." He pulled a small whistle from his pocket and blew 3 short bursts, a pattern. Shadow's head snapped up, his ears locked forward. Then, incredibly, he trotted halfway across the paddock and stopped, standing at perfect attention. Caspian's jaw dropped. "What did you just do?" "That's a recall pattern used by search and rescue units," Alaric explained. "Your horse responds to SAR protocols. Look at his scars more carefully. That mark on his flank, that's from brush penetration, probably thorny scrub. He's been in rough terrain, tracking or searching. The ear notch could be from barbed wire. And his eyes. Mr. Hendricks, this horse has seen crisis situations." Maris moved closer, her veterinary instincts engaged. "Can you check his teeth and hooves? We need to confirm his age and care history." Over the next hour, with patient work and soft commands, they managed a brief examination. Shadow cooperated, stiffly, reluctantly, but he cooperated. Alaric's findings were damning. "He's 8, maybe 9 years old. Well-trained before age 5, I'd estimate. But look here." He pointed to Shadow's hooves. "Severe neglect over the past year, maybe longer. These cracks and chips come from standing in wet, filthy conditions. And these scars, they're layered, old and new. Someone worked this horse hard, then discarded him when he became inconvenient." "Search and rescue," Caspian repeated. "Can you find out which unit?" Alaric pulled out his phone. "I know people. Give me a few days." 3 days later, Alaric returned with a manila folder and a grim expression. His name was Midnight Commander, registered SAR horse with the Carbon County Emergency Response Team until 18 months ago. His handler was a man named Victor Crane, one of the best trackers in the state. What happened? Victor died in a rescue attempt. Fell through ice trying to save a stranded hiker. Midnight Shadow was there. After Victor's death, his widow couldn't afford the upkeep. Sold him to a budget stable that saw dollar signs in a trained SAR horse. They pushed him too hard, too fast, in for-profit rescue demonstrations. When he started refusing to perform, probably from grief and trauma, they labeled him dangerous and sent him to auction. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Shadow hadn't become wild. He'd become heartbroken. He'd lost his partner, his purpose, and then been exploited and abused by people who saw him as a commodity. There's more. Alaric added quietly. Victor's widow, Patricia Crane, has been trying to find him for months. She never wanted to sell him. Her brother-in-law forged documents and sold Shadow without her knowledge, pocketing the money. When she found out, the stable claimed they'd already resold him, and the trail went cold. Caspian felt rage and sadness warring in his chest. "Can we contact her?" "Already did. She's driving down tomorrow." Patricia Crane arrived at noon in a weathered pickup truck, her face lined with worry and hope. She was in her 50s, with Victor's kind eyes. Caspian could see that in the photos she showed him. Shadow was in the far paddock when Patricia stepped out of her truck. She didn't call out or rush forward. She simply stood by the fence and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Caspian, Maris and Alaric watched from the barn, barely breathing. Finally, Shadow's head lifted. His nostrils flared, catching a scent carried on the autumn wind. His entire body went rigid. Then, slowly, he began to walk toward the fence. Not the fearful, defensive movement Caspian had grown accustomed to, but something different. Tentative, hopeful. Patricia remained still, tears streaming down her face. "Midnight," she called softly. "Baby, is that you?" Shadow, Midnight, broke into a trot, then a canter. He reached the fence and stopped just short of Patricia, his nose stretched forward, breathing in her scent. She raised her hand slowly, and he pressed his muzzle into her palm. The sound Patricia made was part sob, part laugh. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to lose you. Victor would be so angry with me." Caspian approached slowly. "Mrs. Crane, I want you to have him back. No charge. He was never really mine. He was just waiting." Patricia shook her head, still stroking Shadow's face. "I can't take him, Mr. Hendricks. I live in a small house in town now. No land, no facilities. After Victor died, I had to sell our ranch. That's how my brother-in-law was able to—" She trailed off, pain flashing across her face. "Then I have a proposition," Caspian said. "Shadow stays here, in proper space with proper care. You visit whenever you want, weekly, daily, whatever you need. And maybe you could help me train him back, not for rescue work unless he wants that, but to remember that not all humans will hurt him." Patricia looked between Caspian and the horse she'd thought she'd lost forever. "You'd do that? For $1 horse?" "He was never a dollar horse," Caspian said firmly. "He was priceless. Someone just forgot how to see it." Over the following weeks, Patricia became a regular presence at the ranch. She taught Caspian the commands Victor had used, the gentle techniques that had made Midnight one of the best SAR horses in the state. Slowly, carefully, Shadow began to trust again. Maris suggested they contact the county emergency services. "He's too valuable to retire completely. What if he could train the next generation of SAR horses, pass on his knowledge?" The idea took root. Within 2 months, Shadow had been certified as a training horse for new SAR recruits, both equine and human. He would never have to perform dangerous rescues again, but his expertise wouldn't be wasted. On a cold December morning, Caspian stood in the paddock watching Shadow work with a young SR volunteer and her nervous mare. Shadow moved with patience and precision, demonstrating techniques, showing the younger horse that strange noises and obstacles weren't threats. Patricia stood beside Caspian, her breath misting in the winter air. "Victor would be proud," she said. "Not just of Midnight, but of you. You saw value where everyone else saw a problem." "I saw someone who'd been rejected," Caspian replied. "I guess I understood how that felt." Shadow finished his demonstration and trotted over to them, accepting carrots and praise with dignity. His coat had filled out, glossy and healthy. The scars remained, they always would, but they no longer defined him. "What made you bid that day?" Patricia asked. "At the auction. Why $1? Caspian thought back to that moment, the way Shadow's eyes had held his, the pull he couldn't explain. I think I think we both needed saving. I just happened to be in a position to throw the first rope. That evening, as the sun set over the Rockies, casting the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold, Caspian sat on the paddock fence. Shadow approached, not with fear or suspicion, but with something that looked remarkably like friendship, and rested his great head against Caspian's shoulder. "You're not a dollar horse," Caspian murmured, running his hand along Shadow's neck. "You never were. You're worth more than anyone could count." In the distance, Maris's porch light flickered on. Patricia's truck was parked by the barn where she was preparing evening feed. The ranch that had been too quiet, too empty, now hummed with life and purpose. Shadow nickered softly, not in pain or fear, but in something that sounded like contentment. And Caspian realized that sometimes the best purchases aren't measured in dollars. They're measured in second chances, in trust rebuilt, and in the courage to see value where others see only loss. The rejected wild horse had taught them all a lesson that no amount of money could buy, that every soul, human or animal, deserves to be seen for who they truly are, not what circumstances have forced them to become.